Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and Ann Esselstyn. I'm so pleased that you're willing to be here and contribute to what I know is going to be a very, very significant contribution. I mean, all that started because of your Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, your book. You started to see things in your clinical practice that you probably were surprised yourself at seeing. Is that correct?
Well, the stirrings that really got me interested in this, I was probably midway through my surgical career, and I was chairman of our breast cancer task force. And probably the late 1970s, early 80s, I just became increasingly disenchanted with the fact that no matter how many women for whom I did breast surgery, I was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And this kind of led to this global research pattern, when it was striking to identify the fact that in Kenya, for instance, that breast cancer was sometimes 30 and 40 times less frequent than in the United States. If you were in rural Japan in the 1950s, breast cancer was very infrequently identified. And yet as soon as the Japanese women would migrate to the United States by the second and third generation, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. But even more powerful was the data from Japan in 1958 with cancer of the prostate. How many autopsy-proven deaths were there in the entire nation of Japan in 1958? 18. One of the most mind-boggling public health figures I've ever heard. And yet by 1978, that figure was up to 137, which still pales in comparison to the 28,000 who will die of prostate cancer this year in this country. But at that point, I made a decision that might have been incorrect, but nevertheless, I felt that my bones would go and be dust before I really would get answers between nutrition and cancer. Although in hindsight, I'm not sure that's entirely correct. But nevertheless, it seemed to me that the way to get at cancer was through the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization, which was heart disease. Because in this global review, there were multiple cultures, even today, that because of heritage and tradition, they are plant-based, and cardiovascular illness is virtually non-existent in those areas. And yet, when you look at our GIs who died in Korea and in Vietnam, 80% already at autopsy had gross evidence of coronary disease you could see without a microscope. And that study was repeated now 40 years later, this time with young women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who have died of accidents, homicides, and suicides. And the disease is now ubiquitous. Everybody has coronary artery disease in their 20s who's been eating the typical Western diet. So this really has a very, very exciting implications for what it is that we can do, because this is not, because of the cultural differences and the understanding that we have of this disease from an epidemiological standpoint. There is no point in throwing up your hands and saying there's nothing we can do about this, it's inevitable, you can't cure this condition. That's crazy. So that was kind of where my research had its takeoff point. And then we started with those 24 patients in our original study, who literally were, my late brother-in-law used to say, they were the walking dead.
Yes. Yes.
And they had failed their first or second bypass, they had failed their first or second angioplasty, or they were too sick for these procedures, or they had refused. There were 5 who were told that they would not live out the year. And it's exciting to think that all 5 of those made it beyond 20 years. All those compliant patients continue to do so well without really progression of their disease. And that has since led to a larger study of hundreds, which we're in the process of publishing now. But it clearly has set up a very exciting pathway, because the reason, I guess, that people may consider what I'm suggesting as extreme or strict or severe is because we are now at a point with this illness that we understand that coronary artery disease is literally nothing more than a toothless paper tiger that need never exist, and if it does exist, it need never ever progress. This is a food-borne illness. We create it by what we eat. How? Because we are all invested with this marvelous guardian, the life jacket of our blood vessels. It's a carpet, 1 cell layer thick, that lines the inside of our arteries. It has this crazy name, the endothelium. And the endothelium makes this absolutely magic molecule called nitric oxide that protects us. Well, then why are these, with these GIs at age 20 already have heart disease? Because we now know that every time certain foods pass our lips, we so injure, we so imperil that delicate endothelial lining that the level of nitric oxide that we were making when we were 4 and 5 years old, which was, let's say, up at our eyebrows, now suddenly gets lower and lower and lower, so that by the time we're in our 20s, we don't have enough to protect us. And it continues to get lower and lower, so instead of just having microscopic signs of vascular disease, now in our 40s, 50s, and 60s, we start having these cardiac events, heart attacks, strokes, and the like. But there is really right now a feeling in the cardiovascular community that the reason we use these drugs for heart disease and the reason we use these stents and bypasses, there is what I consider to be an absolutely mistaken belief that patients won't change their lifestyle. And I think we have proved beyond a doubt, not only with the original group who stayed with it for over 20 years, but in the subsequent group of hundreds, that they will adhere to these significant lifestyle changes once they have had a sufficient encounter with a physician. We happen to do it over a single 5-hour intensive counseling session, giving them all this information about what are the foods that in there are in the American diet. And every time they pass your lips, you injure your endothelial cells, because we've shown that once you stop that entirely, I mean, there's no cheating. Once you stop injuring your endothelial cells, this disease is history. Not only can you halt it.
You said it takes knowing a little bit more, like even a list of foods. I mean, that must alone be an eye-opener for them to look down over this list.
Actually, it's a very, very short list, but it's a significant list. Namely, the foods that injure our endothelium every time they pass our lips are oils, olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil,
coconut oil,
palm oil.
Yes, and
Dairy
coconut oil
products.
has gotten so much popularity recently.
Dairy products, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, yogurt, and anything with a mother, anything with a face. Meat, fish, chicken, and turkey. Caffeine.
Oh, caffeine. I didn't know that one.
You can have coffee without caffeine.
Oh, good.
But so the exciting thing is that it can be quite powerful, and it can be persistent, and there's no real injury or downside. It's such a safe treatment. Everybody's got to eat.
I saw you on television standing by the refrigerator, which I'm assuming was in your house, and you took up a big piece of kale, and with all of the energy that I used to see my neighbor chopping the necks off of chickens, I must say.
I stripped it.
Yes.
And you know something funny? One of our sons looked at that and said, all I saw when the refrigerator was off was beer.
Well, we learned that beer isn't all that bad for us, right? A little bit of sugar in there. But how is your favorite way to fix kale? Because at every turn, it seems
just
as though kale's in the
eat
first.
kale, all the greens. Eat them, boil them, put them in soup, put them in pasta, put them in the boiling water before the pasta's done. You know, you can use any greens: kale, collards, mustard greens, bok choy. I mean, they're all wonderful. You can make great wraps with collards.
What would you put with collards in a wrap?
You take a collard leaf and put it in boiling water for 30 seconds. It just makes it soft. You don't have to, but you can do that. And then I put in hummus. Now we use hummus without tahini, without oil. You can make it easily. Sometimes you can buy it. I mean, one of the key things is to read ingredients. I mean, it is such an eye-opener once you start reading the ingredients in packaged products. For instance, you may find oil in 2 places. Why does an ingredient list have oil in the beginning and oil at the end? If they had just one oil, it might be the first ingredient. In cereal, you get 4 different sugars: molasses, fructose. If they had one sugar, it would be the first ingredient. I mean, if people just started doing such a simple thing as reading ingredients, they might not choose that product.
Well, how do you handle...
Oh, but kale, I didn't tell you.
Yes.
With our wraps, we quickly cook the kale for 30 seconds so it's soft. Put hummus, green onions, cilantro, red peppers, cucumbers. You can do anything you want to fill it with, asparagus. And then I put lots of lemon zest and then roll it up into little sushi-like pieces. It's delicious.
Oh, that's good.
You can fill it with anything, but it's a nice way. And the other ways, just put greens, strip them or cut them up, put them in boiling water 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then make them as the nest on which everything else goes. Mix them in your food. Put a big pile on your plate. Just eat them. And, you know, the greens are wonderful with a little balsamic vinegar on them.
Oh, I know, too, and I might say that the book that you produced, you did the recipes.
Absolutely.
And I tell you, I didn't get any nut recipes in that book except one, because for heart patients, no nuts. But we have one wonderful recipe in there, which is walnut sauce that has some walnuts, garlic, and tahini, low-sodium tahini. I mean, a low-sodium tamari. And it's divine. On kale. It's wonderful, or anything. But it's a really nice recipe.
And is that one of your favorites?
All of Ann's preparations are my favorite.
That is a very safe comment to make, I would say.
No, because you see, it's so exciting when we get a chance to do the presentations together, because when I get through, people understand exactly what has been the causation and what they have to do to make the change. And they're often kind of sitting there a little bit like a puppy in the deep grass. Gosh, okay, how do I do this? Whew. This is where Ann comes on like a dynamite to really make sense out of this whole thing about how to procure these foods, how to read ingredients, how to prepare the foods, how to deal with travel and restaurants and friends' houses.
It's because you can say all you want to say, but unless you can implement it, or people know really what to do. So it's really the whole picture that needs to be addressed. I was wondering.
I mean, there are very easy ways to eat plant-based without a lot of preparation. I mean, you know, I taught for years. I didn't have time to cook. I mean, we had baked potatoes. The sweet potatoes are fabulous. Just, you know, cook a whole ton of them, and you can make. If you get those silpat, I don't know if you've seen them, but they're wonderful.
The non-stick
pads, and you put them on a pan, and then put sweet potato that you cut into fry shape, or white potato, and just put them in the oven for 400 until they're done, and they are wonderful.
No need for any oil.
You don't need any oil. You don't need anything on them. And it's French fries. And you can make burgers, you know, combining lentils and oats and onion and things, and make great burgers. Pizza's delicious without cheese. There's some wonderful crusts that you can get. Sammy's Bakery in Florida. You have to order it online, but oh my gosh, that's a great crust.
Oh.
And there's one, Nature's Highlight has a brown rice pizza crust that's you buy in health food stores. That's delicious.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. I'm trying to imagine what it was like as a surgeon at Cleveland Clinic, pulling the fat out of arteries and whatever else you needed to do.
But he was never a heart surgeon.
Oh, not a
he
heart
was
surgeon.
a general surgeon.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
So he never had to do that.
I guess because we're talking about heart disease, I flipped to that, and I really didn't know that. But what was, you had to be faced with a lot of disagreement, or maybe surgeons are afraid, what, you're destroying my business.
Well, there's no question that what I do is an enormous threat to some of the largest cash cows we have in medicine. But that's something that is really, that we change all the time. For instance, when I first went into surgery, in my particular specialty, the most common operation we were doing was for duodenal ulcer, or peptic ulcer. And you very, very infrequently hear of anybody doing surgery for that these days. Why? Because there were a couple of Australian physicians who, when they received these hemigastrectomy specimens from the surgeon who looked inside these stomachs that they received, they said they could find bacteria. And everybody looked down their nose at these people and said, no, you're crazy. There's no bacteria that can live in a vat of gastric acid. And they said, no, there's really something there. And sure enough, they identified a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori, which was responsible for creating these ulcers. And they subsequently found that just with a few days of antibiotics, you could wipe out these gastric bacteria, and the ulcer was healed. So an entire specialty. I mean, there were some clinics that all they did was this gastric surgery. In a flash, gone. Now, I don't think it's going to be quite that rapid with heart disease, but there is an enormous investment of people and personnel that really don't want to see this epidemic end. I mean, for instance, the stent industry, they make $5 billion a year. How about the statin drug industry? $25 billion a year. Do they want to see this epidemic go away? Or even, for instance, the physicians who are cardiologists, who are interventional, or cardiac surgeons are hardly clamoring for fewer and fewer patients. So there's going to be an adjustment period, but what will really prevail here ultimately is the science will define what is the truth, and then the word will get to the public, and then certainly the pressures will bear. And also what will happen is methods of remuneration will be altered. You will no longer be rewarding physicians for the non-treatment of a foodborne illness, but you will be rewarding those, perhaps, who are modifying or helping the patients to modify their lifestyle, so they no longer have to have this illness, or they no longer have to have it. If they do have it, it doesn't have to progress, and show them how to reverse it.
It's truly exciting, and I'm sure that you're very proud of him. I already saw how proud he is of you. I just thank you so very, very much.
Well, thank you for those words, and it just is, the reason I think it's so, quite frankly, it's so exciting is that heart disease is nothing more than a portal of entry to what really could be a seismic revolution in health. Because right now, the line of health expenditure that this country is on cannot be sustained. As wealthy as this country is, you can't have a medication for every single thing imaginable. And with people having these common chronic killing diseases that in truth need never even exist. But this seismic revolution in health, the reason we're so passionate about it is that it's never going to come from the invention of a pill. It's never going to come from another procedure or operation. Where this revolution is going to occur is when we in the medical profession will have the ability to share with the public what is the lifestyle and the nutritional literacy that will permit them to live in a way that they never have to encounter these illnesses. And that's extremely exciting when you think that 75%, but it's this whole avenue that we've got to finish. But I think that cardiac disease is going to be our port of entry to make this happen.
You know, a really good thing about this way of eating is you don't have to count calories. I mean, if you want to lose weight, cut out flour products. But you don't have to eat so many pounds of this a day or so many pounds of that. I mean, you know, you try and eat a lot of greens, but it's not rigid, it's not counting, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's
so
amazing.
it makes it, I think, much more accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
It's not as though
It's
you
just-
have to learn something, that you're keeping track of this and
No.
that.
No.
And people worry so much about calcium and protein.
No.
I was vegetarian for 3 years and didn't pay any attention at all, and had my blood done. And it
Just
was
be sure you take your
extraordinary.
B12.
But
B12, that's right.
eat greens and all the vegetables. You know,
Yes.
that's key.
Yeah.
And it's easy to eat. Maybe too much fruit, but whole grains. That whole has to be in front of wheat
So
or
are
it's
you
white
an
flour.
oatmeal
Oats,
family in the
oats
morning?
every day, but not oatmeal. Never.
Oh, really?
You
We
just
eat our oats without cooking.
What kind of oats? Steel oats?
No, well, they're fine, but you can't. We don't cook anything. I mean, so the steel cut oats. There's some great recipes for those oats, but
So when you say you don't cook
we just
anything,
use the oats as
The
if it were a
old-fashioned.
cold cereal, and put them in with alternative milks and fruit.
you
And
just let it soak.
no, just eat it as if it were
Looks like a
cornflakes.
corsair.
Cold.
For those, because those oats, believe it or not, old-fashioned Quaker oats, for instance, they have already been cooked and crushed between steel rollers. They have, and not like they came off the back 40. They are ready to go. Pour them in the bowl. Add the milk. Maybe some grape nuts for crunch. Maybe some blueberries. Maybe some raspberries. Maybe a banana. Some raisins. And a feast.
A few walnuts if you don't have heart disease.
I thank
It's great.
both of you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank
Lots
you.
of